Good Friday afternoon, second show of the week. We're not even of the year, not even to September 1st. That's impressive in its own right. I don't know how impressive it is to Matt or to Brian, but you see them identified here, and they're here not against their will, but they are against their sleep. We're in a little bit of sleep deprivation mode, just like everybody else that was involved in Purdue's 31-21-7 loss to Northwestern last night. And I want to first thank our sponsors, Triple X on the hill but on the level, a Purdue tradition since 1929. John Basham and the folks at Basham Reynolds still going hot and heavy, getting students in the second week of school situated. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day, stay at HGI tonight. And State Farm agent Trent Johnson, TrentIsMyAgent.com. Trent will be on the road tonight, I know, officiating the Zionsville Westfield. He had that West Side Jeff game a couple weeks ago. Our sponsors pretty involved with the whole Purdue thing and the community as well. All right, guys, we're barely 14 hours after this game. I thought the game would never end, first and foremost, but I'll ask you first, Matt, just your overnight impressions of what we saw from Purdue and the disappointing loss, but what?
I thought it was a missed opportunity. I thought there was a lot of opportunity for Purdue on a nationally televised audience stage to really put themselves on and let the country know that they were ready to win a big game like this. And I think Jeff Brom kind of said it after the game. They're not ready. They've got a ways to go before they're ready to win a big game like this. And one of the ways you win a big game like this is you don't throw the ball to the other team. Or as he said, toss the ball to the other team. And they did that 3 times in the first half and probably should have been down by a heck of a lot more than the score indicated at halftime. And they were lucky to even be in the ball game, I thought, at halftime. And Northwestern absolutely turned 3 Elijah Sindelar interceptions into 21 points, and that was basically how they won the ball game.
Yeah, Brian?
The one interception right for the half was the game changer,
Yeah.
because you have the ball with a chance to go in tied after you're down 14-0, despite your own mistakes. You turn it back over, they score to go up 2 touchdowns at halftime. I thought that was where the game was basically lost. But, we can talk about the interceptions. We can talk about the mental errors a lot, because obviously there were 4 really big mistakes, probably 3 really big mistakes. I think one of the interceptions was palatable. 2 of them were not.
Yeah.
So the 2 interceptions that weren't palatable plus the personal foul at the end were 3 mental errors that really, really killed Purdue. But that stuff's going to get a lot of attention. But you also look at the way the defense played in the first half relative to how it played in the second half. And then you look at it like, well, if something happened at halftime that all of a sudden that level of play needed from those young and experienced defensive players resonates moving forward, you wonder if perhaps that wasn't some sort of turning point that we might look back at a couple weeks from now and say that was pretty damn important, because Purdue took a lot in a loss in week 1 last year. The circumstances are very different because there's expectations now. This team expects to be good, whereas last year it had to be shown that it can be good. But I think if whatever transformed in the defense from one half to another, if that endures, this loss might have some value long term.
Yeah, Matt, you were already going back to the game tape and trying to discern kind of what you saw from that standpoint. What do you? And I know you're not all the way through it just yet, but the quarterback play, Elijah Sindelar struggled with accuracy and maybe also obviously in the 3rd interception, especially decision making. But what are you seeing so far from there?
Alan, Jeff Brom talked out throughout this entire month about the vertical passing game and executing the deep ball. Well, Elijah Sindelar just didn't do that. He didn't complete a pass over 20 yards in the air the whole first half that he was in the ball game. And on throws that were over 10 yards, he was 4 of 12 for 76 yards and a pick. And that's not going to get the job done. And his big arm and his quote-unquote arm talent is what got him the starting job. Because as we had heard throughout the entire preseason, we had heard that turnovers and interceptions were a problem. And I think that Jeff Brom was banking on the idea that if I want to throw the ball vertically down the field, it has to be Eli and it has to be number 2 back there in order to make those plays happen. And then they get into a second half, and I don't know if they ever completed or attempted a pass even over 20 yards with David Blau. So it becomes a completely different game plan. But Eli, if he's going to continue to be the starting quarterback here at Purdue, he's got to do a better job on passes over 10 yards in the air to some of those, on those deep balls to some of those receivers, whether it's Rondell Moore, Isaac Zico, Jared Sparks. He's got to do a better job of completing those types of passes and making them more high percentage throws for Purdue. Because if he doesn't, then David Blau is your starting quarterback, because I think Jeff Brom has an understanding that the 5th-year senior won't turn the ball over as much as Eli did on Thursday night and make some of the mental errors that really just cost Purdue the ball game.
Yeah.
All that being said, I don't think Sindelar settled in at all yesterday. That being said, you did see why he was the guy and why maybe he needs to be the guy moving forward. He throws Rondell Moore open on the 32-yard touchdown. It was a little bit behind him on the one Rondell Moore dropped. But you look at the quick outs to Jared Sparks where the ball gets out there on a rope, allows Jared Sparks to make plays one-on-one in space. All due respect to David Blau, he doesn't get the ball there that way. You saw in the second half, David Blau changed the running game a little bit.
Yeah.
But once Northwestern acclimated to the East-West passing game, acclimated to the running game a little bit, the threat of the read option, Purdue couldn't do anything vertically. I thought a huge play was when they hit a vertical ball finally, and by vertical I mean more than a few yards up the field, north-south, to Isaac Zico. It gets wiped out by a penalty. They finally hit one, and it gets wiped out. Purdue gets backed up. But what my point is, you did see flashes of why Sindelar brings something to the vertical passing game that perhaps David Blau does not. And I do think whether Elijah Sindelar is starting the game or he's rotating in with Blau, that is what Purdue needs as part of its offense. The other thing that's really kind of the curiosity here is that Elijah Sindelar's issues last night were not his issues at the end of the year last year. Elijah Sindelar's issues last year were David Blau's issues at this time a year ago, where he would get out on the run and he would force something into coverage, trying to do too much. And you have to hope, if you're Purdue, that this is kind of an aberration. This was a week one deal, a long offseason for Elijah Sindelar, a lot of emphasis on the quote-unquote quarterback battle. A lot going into what he did last year, perhaps maybe a little bit of a sense of invincibility after he played on
ACL.
Missing a very important knee ligament last year and won some really big games. You just don't know. But it was very unlike Elijah Sindelar, and if you're Purdue, you have to hope it's an aberration that was a one-week thing, because two of those three interceptions were as egregious a decision-making breakdown as you're going to see, and that was very uncharacteristic of him.
Yeah, I agree with Brian in the sense that if you're going to continue this quarterback rotation, it was very clear to me on Thursday night that Purdue's coaches felt like they can't do specific things with David Blau, and they feel like the playbook completely opens up with Elijah Sindelar. So if that's the case, if you're a Purdue fan, you probably ought to hope that Elijah just makes smarter decisions with the football and continues to be the starting quarterback.
In fairness, too, Purdue couldn't protect deep drops
Right.
consistently. And when you look at the two bad picks Sindelar threw, both of them were under some measure of duress. You look at what Purdue couldn't do vertically with David Blau in the game. He didn't have the opportunity to, because I don't think Purdue could give him the time he needed to look downfield. I think you got to give Northwestern credit for that. I do think Purdue, has an offensive line you can feel good about for the first time in a long time at Purdue. I think this was a good defense making a respectable offensive line look a little bit shaky. I think Grant Hermans in particular is playing his way back into shape after last year's ACL injury, and I think over time he's going to get better. I think you're going to see fewer penalties. I just think you're going to see that offensive line get a little bit better as time goes on, and they need to give their quarterbacks time to look down the field. They just couldn't do it last night.
Northwestern has one of the best pass rushes in the Big Ten, little known, and Purdue's offensive tackles just got completely ripped. And that may happen a lot when teams play Northwestern this year.
This would have been a good year to start with an FCS team.
No doubt.
A lot of years would be a good year to start with an FCS team to kind of work some of this stuff out. Had the defense played that first half from an effort perspective against Bowling Green, let's say, and had a shaky half, they probably still win that game. But Purdue had a lot of things it had to work through in week one that you don't work through things against a team like Northwestern and expect to win. You have to be good from the outset. You have to be consistent from the outset. And Purdue obviously fell into some of the trappings of a week one game. And you have to hope if you're Purdue that stuff manifests itself into pretty consistent improvement from here on out.
That's why I was surprised, Alan, that I looked late last night. This is the first home opener that Purdue's lost since, I think, 2003 or something like that. So it's because they haven't played teams like Northwestern. They haven't opened up at Ross-Ade Stadium with an opponent like that.
They did lose to Bowling Green in 2003. We were talking
There
about
it
that
is.
analogy. They've never beaten Bowling Green, so I was going to pick
Total coincidence. That was just the
you
first
on that
mag
one.
school I could think of.
Right.
Purdue 0-2, I believe, it against the Falcons, and I don't know if they make it another shot at them down the road. But no, I also think the Rondale Moore experience was pretty unique last night. It was, I could say clearly, at least in my years of watching, no true freshman's ever put on a performance in a first game like that. I'm not sure. And Brian, I'll ask you of any others that in game one. It just was astounding that he almost took had the all-purpose yards record in the first half. I mean, over a 46-year-old record, which he finally did break in the second half. But an amazing performance.
Yeah, and that's, as Jeff Brom said after the game, that's what they've been seeing in practice. The thing that is impressive about Rondale Moore is obviously he's a freak show athletically. Obviously he's got elite speed, elite quickness, that sort of breathtaking ability that makes the crowd kind of gasp every time he touches the ball. But it's the way he carries himself. It's the way he, says all the right things, seems to do all the right things, the way he acts like a professional, and he just, I'm sure people loved his post-game interview yesterday where he basically says, I would have traded all the yards for, a win. Sometimes guys just kind of say that. You really genuinely get the sense that he kind of believes that. He carries himself like a professional. And I'm saying a lot of the same things about somebody who was very good in basketball a few years ago, Caleb Swanigan, obviously. Yeah. He just approaches things like a professional. He carries himself like a professional. And when you do that at that young an age, it really, really is impressive.
Yeah, he was impressive. I mean, Matt, when you look at that and then you look at the world of other guys you may get over time, if you could get a couple more, Rondale Moores may not be possible, but guys that can really stretch the field, you see what that offense can be with just having that type of talent level.
Well, there was a tweet, and Brian may be more insightful on this than I am, but there was a tweet from Wendell Robinson, who's a 2019 prospect. It was at the game last night. He's a big-time Purdue target who basically just wanted to praise Rondale Moore the entire night. Yeah. And for anybody that thinks, in my impression, and I could be wrong, that thinks that they're going to negatively recruit Purdue to Wendell Robinson because Rondale Moore plays his position, you best come up with another tactic, because I think that they feel like they can be teammates and be fine with that. You get the sense that if Purdue can recruit a lot more Rondale Moore-ish players, they're on their way, especially with Jeff Brom, the way he likes to scheme it up. I've been critical early on, since I got here on the beat, Alan, that Jeff Brom needs to stop recruiting tiny receivers and go get a big guy. Well, Rondale Moore is not a big guy, and that's maybe why he's at Purdue and maybe got overlooked a little bit, but he had a big-time performance. And so if you get more guys like that with world-class speed and world-class athleticism, Purdue's going to be just fine.
Yeah, Brian, you can speak obviously with Rondale Moore, just that unbelievable athleticism. But what this means in recruiting is, as you're following that beat closer than anybody on this earth, I think that what do you see? Why is that in a performance like that so important, just in terms of guys that are out there, but also just the tone of the program?
Well, Jeff Brom's reputation is as an offensive innovator and a guy who is going to take talented players, fast players, and put them in the best positions possible to succeed. He has one of those players now. In his first game with that player got 300 yards. So it is validation of everything that Purdue has been telling recruits ever since Jeff Brom got this job, built on top of Purdue validating last season everything they've been telling recruits about what they were going to do to the program, how things were going to change, how the expectation level was going to change, how the program has transformed. Purdue basically just keeps validating everything it's telling recruits. And when you're a new staff, which Purdue is still a relatively new staff, you say a lot of stuff, but then there comes a point in time where you have to back it up, or else it all turns into a pumpkin. And Purdue's backed up everything it's told recruits. What Purdue did not have last year was speed on offense. Had Terry Wright been able to stay healthy, had Terry Wright been able to learn a little bit faster, maybe not gone through that junior college transition, maybe you would have seen him have had a better year last year and more of a template of, hey, here's what we can do with a player of your ability. But Purdue's recruiting a lot of really high-end wide receivers right now. And they're all telling them, we know how to feature you. We know how to put you in the best positions to succeed. If you want to be the man right away, don't go to Ohio State. Don't go to Penn State. Come here, because this is what we're going to do with you from day one. And their precedent right now is Rondell Moore. So
Good one to have.
now you're going to run into the complication sometimes of, hey, there's only so many catches to go around, and you've got Rondell Moore for presumably most of a 4-year career. It's a little early to be talking about that, but obviously they showed last night we know how to use a player of a certain skill set on offense. They did it at Western Kentucky, and they're 1-for-1 here at Purdue with a player like that.
Alan, and I, without the risk of talking out of school, I can verify what Brian was talking about from a maturity standpoint, because I walked directly behind Rondell Moore as he was walking out of Mackey Arena and back toward the stadium, and he turned to me and he said, "Why were people asking me so much about my yards?" And I said, "Well, you just broke a record." He said, "Well, we lost. This is unacceptable." And that was the conversation. And so you get a sense that this young man understands that he's here to lead Purdue to a lot more wins and not a lot more yards.
Yeah. They had another key factor last night that's been a problem for Purdue for years, really probably since Ryan Kerrigan was around to some extent, or K1 Short. Pass rush and the ability to manufacture one. What did you see, Brian? I'll start with you from a scheme standpoint. They got burned the time that they tried to blitz Jacob Thieneman, as I recall.
Yeah.
But how do you solve that problem, or is that a maturity problem, or is there potential? Giovanni Revere on down the line are the guys that could develop into decent pass rushers. Lorenzo Neal,
Well,
obviously, too.
oftentimes in a situation like this, depending on the circumstances, year 2 is where you feel it. If you've inherited a roster that maybe isn't what you need. And that's where Purdue is right now. Purdue inherited Jalen Robinson last year. The coaching staff put him where he belonged. They inherited Eddie Wilson. They inherited Austin Larkin, who was at worst, solid player. Now you got wiped out by graduation. The young guys you recruited right away, who might be good players in time, Giovanni Revere for one, probably going to be good players in time, not quite ready yet. Purdue has a defensive line issue right now. They just have to get better. Perfect example here. Kewan Jones tore his ACL last year, barely practiced in training camp. He's out there on the second series with Alex Criddle, who was a guy who hasn't played a whole lot. That's your second team defensive tackles in there in the first quarter of a really big, obviously Big Ten game. They're just going to have to get through it. This is going to be a popsicle sticks and scotch tape situation where Purdue's going to have to just piece it together. They're going to have to get creative probably in certain situations. The pass rush has been a question from day one, and it's going to be a process. I don't know if Purdue has that guy. We'll find out maybe in 6 weeks if somebody becomes that guy. But as of right now, Purdue's going to have to, get creative to create a pass rush. They're going to have to get really creative to eat important snaps at defensive tackle, keeping Lorenzo Neal as fresh as possible. Yeah. And they need him to have the best season of his college life thus far.
What did you make, Matt, and obviously very difficult and disappointing play by Neal at the end? I know that Jeff Brom was not enamored with the call, but probably not a good situational choice. If I'm saying, was that a fair assessment of his post game?
Well, I don't know if he necessarily got the best look at it at the time. Yeah. I think when he watches the film, he'll probably be like,
I know, I agree. After watching on replay, you see it there.
I think he was more upset at initially the call, but even there having to be a call. If Lorenzo Neal just lets him go as a senior co-captain or upperclassman co-captain should do, then I think he was upset at the entire situation. Is that we just got to stop. Okay, now I got a situation where I can go win the ball game, and then that happened, and he was upset at the call, but he was also upset at his player. And I think that. But taking that away, I agree with what Brian said. Is that I asked Purdue's coaches early on in this fall camp, what are you going to have to do to create a pass rush? And I brought up the idea of Lorenzo Neal getting a push vertically up the field at defensive tackle. And you could see that a couple of times where he got in the face of Clayton Thorson and or TJ Green, and it really made a difference. It was either an incompletion or a major negative play. I got told, well, at 330 pounds, you think you're going to be able to do that all the time. I'm sorry, but Lorenzo Neal might have to do that a lot more at
Yeah,
330
they're gonna
pounds. Not only that, Alan, but he's going to have more snaps. And Brian brought this up early in fall camp. How many snaps can you get out of him? You're going to have to get more than you got out of him Thursday night. And I think that's going to be another key going forward is if Purdue's defensive line is going to be really, really good, Nine's going to have to be in the middle, and he's going to have to be in the middle a lot more.
Okay, one last question, and we got Tom Dienhart is here, but for a second segment, but I wanted to ask you both, is this me dreaming this up, but would Jeff Brom, had there not been a penalty on Neal, would Jeff Brom have brought in Sindelar in that last 2 minutes to throw the ball downfield? Do you have any indication? I don't even know. I'm just wondering if that was even in his wheelhouse at that point. I know this is complete conjecture. Just because they're now in a press situation, had to get the ball downfield, but
Well, they weren't. They still had 2.5 minutes or
with
so.
no timeouts.
No timeouts, but you're probably throwing the ball. That's a good question. I mean, it'd be awful hard to
And
bring
that's
him
complete.
in cold.
I understand there's no data to support any of this because this didn't happen. So we don't, and I didn't see him warming up, so I don't.
It's a good question. I mean, if they didn't bring him in at the end of the first half with less than a minute to go to throw the ball up the field, then I don't know if he would have done that with 2.5 minutes to go. I just think it would have been a tough deal to take a guy cold off the sideline after you worry about a guy's mindset, a guy's confidence in a situation like that. But he performed in situations like that last year. The Minnesota game being won after a 4-hour rain delay, whatever it was, comes in, makes the throws to win the game. It's a good question. It's a hypothetical.
Complete hypothetical.
The reality is we never had a chance to find out because Purdue committed a horrible, untimely penalty.
Yeah, at the wrong time. All right, we're going to take a short break, bring in Tom. You will hear more from Matt and from Brian on Golden Black Radio Express later this afternoon as well. Lots of coverage on the site from last night. Like I said, a 3-hour and 47-minute game that started at 8:05. Got us all in late last night, but great night in a lot of ways in Ross-Ade Stadium. A great crowd and in that part, but just if you're a Purdue fan, the only thing that didn't happen, Boilermakers didn't win. So there'll be 11 more shots at that coming up here down the road. All right, we'll take a 2-minute break and bring in Tom Dienhart to stay tuned for the next segment on Golden Black Live.